Picture a highway at 3 in the morning. Venezuela. No headlights behind you. No city glow ahead. Just asphalt and silence. The kind of silence that feels trustworthy. People have been dying on roads exactly like this one. Deep in forests like the ones pressing against the shoulder. And when the reports trickle out, the public does what the public always does. Blames the government. Cartels. Corruption. Something human. Something with a motive. They're wrong. There is something killing people all around Venezuela, and it has nothing to do with the local government. What investigators have pulled from these sites, the residue, the wounds, the structural damage, breaks rules. The kind you learned in a classroom and never once questioned. The earliest case that slipped past the silence? 1954. A Venezuelan forest so dense the canopy erased the sun. And what walked out of that darkness still has no classification. His name was Emolino Martinez, a seasoned hunter. The kind of man whose hands knew the weight of a rifle the way yours know a phone. That night, he was threading his way back through the undergrowth, boots crunching dry leaves. The forest around him so quiet you could hear your own blood moving. No insects, no wind, just the thick, damp nothing of a midnight canopy pressing down on everything. Then the bushes ahead rustled. 2 shapes, barely 3 feet tall, covered in matted, wiry hair, scrawny limbs, crouched in the middle of his path like they owned it. Emolino's first thought: monkeys. Just a pair of feral monkeys too stubborn to scatter. He'd seen dozens in these woods. An annoyance, nothing more. He stepped forward, waved his arms, made noise. The way you'd chase a stray dog off your porch. One of them lunged. And here is where every familiar thing about this story ends. When that creature grabbed Emolino's arm, he felt something that rewired his understanding of what a living body can do. A grip so powerful it felt mechanical, like iron tongs closing around his wrist with the precision of a machine that doesn't know fatigue. Vice-like, completely impossible for something that size. This man, a hunter with thick, conditioned arms built from decades of hauling game through rough terrain, was lifted clean off his feet, slammed into the dirt with the ease of someone tossing a rag doll, by something that barely reached his waist. His mind couldn't file it anywhere. There was no category for this, no reference point, just a scrawny 3-foot thing pinning a grown man to the ground, like it was snapping a matchstick. What saved him was blind panic. His free hand found a rock. He swung it, once, twice, until the grip loosened just enough for him to wrench free. And then he ran. Through branches that tore his skin open, through darkness so total he couldn't tell if he was heading toward the road or deeper into the trees. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out somewhere near his vehicle. Emolino Martinez survived that night. But the man who staggered out of those trees was not the man who walked in. Every certainty he carried about what the natural world could and couldn't do had been cracked open and left in the dirt behind him. And here's the part that unsettles me most. Whatever those things were, crouched on that dark forest path, they didn't stay under the canopy. Because not long after, something started showing up on the roads. Gustavo Gonzalez had been driving cargo routes through Venezuelan back roads for over a decade. Late shifts, bad pavement, the occasional drunk stumbling across the highway, he'd seen it all. So when his headlights caught a shape squatting in the middle of the road, next to something large and round, and glowing, his first reaction wasn't fear. It was annoyance. He killed the engine, told his assistant, "Just stay in the truck. I'm going to go deal with this." He figured it was a kid. Some local messing around with a lantern, maybe. He'd grab whoever it was by the scruff of the neck, shove them off the asphalt, and be done with it. He walked up to the figure. It was small, maybe 3 feet tall, covered in hair. Crouched there, completely motionless, like it was waiting for him. Gustavo reached down and grabbed it, and everything he understood about the world broke apart in his hands. The thing was incredibly light, but stiff, unnaturally stiff. And the texture, rough, bristly, like running your palms across a wire brush. Not skin, not fur. Something his fingers had no category for. Before he could pull away, the creature pushed him, one casual shove, and Gustavo, a grown man, a truck driver with arms built from years of hauling freight, went airborne, 15 feet across the asphalt. He hit the road so hard the breath left his body. Panic took over. He scrambled to his feet, yanked out his knife, and drove the blade straight into the creature's shoulder with everything he had. A loud clink. Metal on stone. The blade didn't cut, didn't pierce. It bounced off like he'd just stabbed a brick wall. The impact jarred his arm all the way up to his shoulder socket. This sick, ringing vibration through the bone that told his body what his mind refused to accept. This thing could not be hurt. Then the sphere above them pulsed. A blinding wash of red light flooded the road, and in that glare, the creature simply left. Gustavo ended up at the local police station that night. They laughed at him, filed nothing. But here's what stayed with me about his account. Gustavo assumed, and reasonably so, that he'd encountered something wearing armor, some kind of biological shell, a hide tough enough to stop a blade. That was the only framework that made sense to him. Something alive, something physical, just protected. The next person to get close enough to one of these things, what they found erased that theory completely. Lorenzo Flores, Jesus Gomez, two hunters, different night, same brush. They found the things crouching in the undergrowth, that same matted fur, those same proportions. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He reversed his shotgun, gripped the barrel, and swung the heavy wooden stock at the nearest creature's torso like a man splitting logs. The wood exploded. Not cracked, not splintered off in pieces. The entire stock detonated on impact, as if he'd brought it down full force on a solid iron anvil. Fragments tore into Lorenzo's hands, his forearms. Jesus pulled him stumbling backward through the brush, both men bleeding, cut open by their own weapon. The creature hadn't moved. So now the record is complete. A knife rings off them like striking brick. A solid hardwood stock, swung with every ounce of a man's survival instinct, simply ceases to exist on contact. Whatever engineering holds these bodies together doesn't answer to anything in our periodic table. Carbon doesn't do this. Calcium doesn't do this. Nothing that grows, nothing that evolves, nothing born from this planet's chemistry does this. The 1954 encounters ended there. The entities withdrew into the brush, back into whatever geometry brought them. The jungle went quiet. But here's what no one standing in those forests could have possibly prepared for. The next time something impossible bled into Venezuela's landscape, it wouldn't have a body you could swing at. No fur, no eyes, no form at all. Just a slow, black, patient hunger, spreading across the arteries of a national highway system. And nothing left to hit. It took 30 years. By the 1980s, the hairy, stunted things from the Venezuelan jungle had faded from living memory. The country moved on, built highways, poured concrete over the old fears. And the only monsters anyone still worried about were human ones. Cartels, petty syndicates, men with cheap revolvers. Comfortable fears. The kind you can name. Miguel would have agreed. He'd driven the Caracas-La Guaira highway more times than he could count. A veteran taxi driver, his Chevy Malibu practically welded to those lanes. He knew every curve, every gradient, every tunnel, mouth that swallowed headlights whole. On this particular night, approaching one of those tunnels, he did what he'd done 10,000 times before. He tapped the brakes. Softly. The Malibu didn't slow down. It lunged forward. The steering wheel went dead in his hands. Not loose. Dead. 2 tons of American steel skating sideways across dry asphalt, as if the road surface had been replaced with polished glass. The car spun a full 360 degrees. Miguel watched the tunnel entrance, the guardrail, the oncoming headlights whip past his windshield in one long, silent rotation. And all he could do was grip a wheel that no longer answered to anything. The Chevy settled on the shoulder. Engine idling. Miguel still alive. When the shaking stopped, he looked back. The lane he'd crossed was covered in a thick, jet-black sheen, a greasy film stretching the full width of the road, gleaming under the sodium lights like something poured there with purpose. And he almost laughed, because he understood. La Mano Negra, the Black Hand, a local syndicate known for slicking highways with motor oil to spin out drivers and rob them in the confusion. Criminal, ugly, but human. Entirely, mercifully human. So Miguel pushed open the door, stepped out into the warm night air, and walked toward that black stain to see for himself. He was about 6 inches from the surface when he noticed something motor oil doesn't do. It moved. The black surface beneath his boot didn't splash, didn't scatter the way any liquid should when a grown man's full weight comes down on it. Instead, it grabbed hold. Miguel lifted his foot, and the substance came with it, pulling upward in long, thick, fibrous strands, stretching like chewing gum between the sole of his boot and the asphalt. And the smell hit him. Sulfur, rotting eggs, and hot tar, filling his sinuses so completely he had to turn his head and spit. This wasn't motor oil. Motor oil is thin. Motor oil runs. Motor oil doesn't reach back for your shoe when you try to walk away from it. Miguel stood there in the middle of that highway, boot still half connected to the road by those dark elastic threads, and for the first time, the comfortable little story he'd been telling himself, the mafia, the spilled crude, the sabotage, just fell apart. Quietly, completely. No petroleum product on Earth behaves like living tissue, and that's exactly what this felt like under his soul. Tissue. Something organic. Something with a grip that suggested intention. But what happened next made the texture irrelevant. He looked further down the road, toward a section that had been aggressively power-washed just hours earlier. He knew this because he'd seen the municipal crews himself on his morning route. Industrial hoses, chemical solvents, the whole operation. That stretch of pavement had been scrubbed raw and left to bake dry under the Venezuelan sun. It was sweating. Tiny black bubbles, barely visible at first, began forming on the surface of the clean rock, not dripping from any vehicle overhead, not seeping in from the road's edge, oozing directly out of the microscopic pores of the stone itself. Miguel watched, and I need you to understand how quietly this happened, how ordinary the sunlight looked while it did, as those individual bubbles swelled, touched their neighbors, and merged. Within seconds, the stain was back, a fresh, glistening film of that same foul substance, regenerating its hold on a road that human beings had just stripped bare, with every tool available to them. The trap rebuilt itself, right in front of his eyes. And that word, trap, is the one that stays with me. Because traps imply design. Traps imply something that wants to catch. A spill doesn't crawl back out of solid rock after you've scoured it away. A spill doesn't sweat through stone the way fever sweats through skin. I have to ask you something. And I mean this quietly, sincerely. Have you ever stood somewhere, a road, an old building, a stretch of woods right before dark, and felt, even when you were completely alone, that the ground beneath your feet was paying attention? That the environment itself was intensely, unnervingly alive? If you have, I genuinely want to hear about it. Tell me down below. Because Miguel, standing on that highway in 1992 with his boots stuck to a road that was quietly breathing beneath him, had just discovered what that feeling actually means when it turns out to be real. He pulled his foot free, walked back to his cab, and he never used the word oil again. Now, here's where the scale shifts. Because when a single cab driver witnesses something like this, it stays a story, an anecdote you can wave off over drinks. But when a national government sees it, when state engineers and military officials and entire road crews watch solid asphalt weep black from its own pores, it becomes a crisis that demands an answer. And Venezuela's government decided they had one. They were going to throw the full weight of modern infrastructure at this substance. Heavy machinery, industrial chemistry, millions of dollars in federal funding. The kind of campaign that radiates absolute institutional confidence. The message was clear. We are bigger than whatever this is. They weren't. An indifferent excretion. That's what they were up against. But the Venezuelan government didn't know that. And even if someone had whispered it to them, I doubt it would have changed a thing. Because what governments do, when something defies every known category, is throw force at it until the budget runs out. 8 miles of highway had become a kill zone. And over the next decade, the state mounted what can only be described as a war, an escalating, increasingly desperate campaign against a substance no chemistry textbook could explain. Phase 1 was limestone, thousands of tons of calcium dust dumped from trucks across every lane. The logic was almost childishly simple. Alkaline powder smothers organic chemistry. Blanket the black stain, choke its metabolism, file the paperwork by Friday. Picture it. White dust settling over the dark slick. Officials in hard hats, arms folded, watching the highway disappear under a clean, pale coating. It must have felt like control. What actually happened was this. The limestone reacted with the substance and produced choking clouds of calcium particulate that blinded drivers mid-lane. Visibility dropped to nothing. And underneath that white haze, the sludge didn't suffocate. It absorbed the calcium and reformed into a slicker, grayer, more lethal film. Vehicles weren't just losing traction anymore. They were hydroplaning on a compound that hadn't existed before the government accidentally created it. So they escalated. Custom heavy-duty scraping machinery was commissioned from Germany. Industrial equipment purpose-built to peel away the top layer of the highway itself. Not clean it. Remove it. Inches of pavement. Ground down to untouched substrate. Massive steel drums screaming against asphalt, hour after hour. Metal teeth ripping into the road like it owed them money. And by '96, the machines had won. The surface was clean. The slick was gone. Reports were filed. Hands were shaken. For 5 years, that stretch of highway was just a highway again. 5 quiet years. In 2001, the black sludge came back, only this time it wasn't on the highway. It surfaced through cracks in downtown Caracas. City intersections. Miles from the original contamination zone. The same viscous, unkillable film, now quietly seeping through the capital itself. And the government's official explanation to the Venezuelan public? Cheap asphalt leakage. Faulty materials from a bad supplier. Cheap asphalt. But here's the thing about cheap asphalt. It doesn't bleed through solid concrete. It doesn't resurface 5 years after industrial removal. And it certainly doesn't explain why the exact origin point of the sludge on that highway, the precise coordinates where it first appeared, fall directly on the same location where, years earlier, something descended from the sky on a night that triggered a full Venezuelan military communications blackout. A night that, to this day, has never been disclosed to the public. So that word, byproduct, let it sit for a moment, because it only becomes truly unbearable when you learn what happened on one specific night in 1986. November. Venezuelan Air Force radar stations along the northern coast picked up returns they couldn't classify. Multiple objects, massive, hovering at low altitude in a tight formation directly above the Caracas-La Guaira highway. Fighter jets scrambled, 2 F-8s out of the Maracay airbase, and the pilots reported the same thing. Enormous metallic spheres radiating shifting, multicolored light, completely stationary, completely silent. The jets closed to within visual range. The objects didn't move, didn't react, didn't acknowledge the aircraft at all. The pilots received no engagement orders. They circled. They watched. And then, after what witnesses on the ground described as several hours of motionless hovering, the light simply rose straight up and vanished. Now here's where your stomach should drop. Pull up the classified coordinates of that 1986 formation, the exact latitude and longitude where those spheres held position. It's the same section of highway, to the kilometer, where La Mancha Negra first began seeping through cracks in the road surface just 3 years later. The same cursed stretch that consumed every industrial chemical, every imported German scraping machine, every government budget for 2 decades straight. And the official explanation? Cheap asphalt. That was their line. But cheap asphalt doesn't regenerate overnight. Cheap asphalt doesn't breathe through microscopic pores. And cheap asphalt doesn't spontaneously manifest on the precise coordinates where an unidentified armada parked itself in the sky for an entire night and then left. So stitch the whole thing together. 1954, something walks out of the Venezuelan jungle. Small, hairy, skin like forged iron, completely indifferent to human weapons. 1986, something returns, parks above a highway, hovers for hours, leaves, and then that road starts bleeding a black substance nothing on this planet can kill. They were parked, and something dripped. The way you might leave an oil stain in a parking lot and never once think about the ants living in the cracks beneath your tires. That highway is still there. People drive it every single morning.